Okay, for this workshop, to access all the information, you'll need to go to Teams, Project Files. Please make sure that you find Revit. There will also be links in ClickUp where you can download this as well. Okay, so for workshop 4, straightforward, I want you to download the whole package. So what I would do, because you're going to require everything, so just go to workshop 4 and you can simply tick everything and download. Remember that this will make it a zip file, and I'm going to download this to my desktop. So open just wherever it downloads. Okay, so that was today. Okay, I'm going to copy and put this on my desktop. So I'm going to cut this and put this on my desktop. And I'm just going to extract everything here. Okay, these are, it depends what you use, but just remember, extract everything to this location that we're working. Please note, before you start the exercise, I've given you some examples, and you would have seen a video before this explaining how these site civil plans work. I've also given you an example of that existing DXF file that had opened in Blender. I've given you a PDF version, which I'll show you in a second. So this will be the PDF version that you'll need to produce. So it's an existing site with major and minor contours at 500 intervals. Okay, remember we represent that information because it comes from a surveyor in meters. So there's certain things that we'll always represent in meters, like site boundaries and contour lines, because we're communicating primarily with the civil and structural engineers and surveyors. Okay, so it'll be civil engineering, surveyor, and structural engineer that will need this information in meters primarily. It will depend, but as a rule of thumb, this is always in meters. Okay, so here's the example of the site plan that we're going to produce. Okay, typically when you're about to start a project, before the surveyor and everyone gets involved, you get given a SG diagram. This is just a legal document highlighting and outlining your property boundaries, and you'll notice it'll give you a series of pegs, which are A, B, C, and D, and it has a description for that peg. So, and a couple of coordinates with the coordinate system. Now this coordinate system, it's very strange how it works in South Africa. So if you're using modern BIM software, this coordinate system doesn't work with modern BIM systems. So it's just something to bear in mind. You might have to do a bit of conversion. And you notice that some of these are relative. These are quite hard to understand and put together if you haven't done any GIS or civil type of work. These are quite difficult to understand. But at least you can see it gives us a lot of information. It shows us the streets, the earth boundaries, the peg numbers, and the distances of each run. Okay, so just your site boundary dimensions, streets, where north is. So when you typically purchase a property, you should be given an SG diagram highlighting the boundaries of your property. Okay, so that's where we start. Then we get information from our surveyor, which is this DXF file, which we'll look at in a minute, but you would have seen how it looks when I've opened up in Blender, and we're going to produce an example PDF as per this for this first part of the workshop. The second part of the workshop, we're going to add stuff and change things. Just remember that this will be 3D in Revit as well. So for now, I know it doesn't look like a 3D object, but when you're creating the site in Revit, it'll be 3D. Okay. So I've given you a starting point, and I've given you some families that we're going to look at as well. All right. Typically, you want a good template so that you can start with good information. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is go to Revit, and we're going to open up that project. So I'm going to go to Open, Desktop, and we're going to start putting this together. Revit. Yes, so I'm going to go to sorry, I've opened a family, so I'm going to say open. Remember, open. Be careful of that. Families have a different extension to projects, so just bear that in mind. So do template files, desktop, workshop 4, Revit. Okay, so we're going to start with this file. I'm going to press open. So you'll notice when you open the project file, it should go straight to the starting view once the project opens. It should go straight to the starting view. Typically, templates work this way. You can set it to starting view, and it just gives you an overview of how to use this project file. Like I've given you a whole lot of information like line types, Okay, but for now, don't worry about that too much. What we need to do is we'll need to focus on the site for the time being. Okay, so you'll see in Revit, we're going to create a series. So it starts off by default. When you open up a Revit project, you're going to have a site level, which in theory is level 0. Okay, so level 0 and site view are the same views. They've just got a different view range setting. Okay, so as a typical level 0, you'll see level 0, if I get a view range, you'll notice the view range is set very differently. Sometimes we've got to adjust this even higher, depends where you're working. So if you're working in Pretoria, for example, where our contours are 1,400 meters above sea level, you're going to have to start adjusting this view range. You'll notice that this is always in millimeters, so to make it meters, you have to add 3 more zeros at the back. Okay, so a site plan, the site plan view is essentially level 0, except it's just got a different view range setting. So currently this is only set to 100 meters above, so you might have to add another 0 to make this work if you're starting to get into sites in Pretoria. Okay, this is quite a complex topic and a lot of people do it different ways. So from office to office this will depend. It'll be very dependent on the office, where the site's located. Okay, so it's quite what's interesting when you are doing topography, sometimes the best workflow is to produce your topography in a separate model to your building model, so that you don't have conflicting levels that you need to manage the whole time. So you should have all known by now that in Revit, if you go to 3D view and we're still looking at our site origin, you will notice that we get these levels. Okay, so if you're working with topography and external works, we've got driveways, there's a whole lot of additional levels that you have to add, and sometimes they will start polluting your building model. So typically we build a building model separate to our site model and then we plug them together. Okay, so but it depends. Small projects you can keep everything integrated, but when projects get larger you have to separate it. So the workflow will depend on the level of detail that you need to achieve and the complexity of the project. So yeah, but we'll get into that when we start doing more complex types of projects, which will be in 3rd year. But for now, just understand that we're going to use our site plan view, and what I'm going to recommend that we do straight out the bat is duplicate the site. So duplicate the view, duplicate with detailing. I'm going to give this a prefix of rename. I'm going to call this WK for working. Okay, so the one view is where we're going to do all our work, and the other view is where we're going to put this view on our sheet. You don't want to you want to keep a separate working view where you do all your planning and testing and all your planning basically. Once you've committed to a proposal, then you put it on the view that will sit on the sheet. Once we've put these views on the sheet, it will start making sense, but for now just understand that we need to duplicate these views. Okay, so for now I'm going to work in the site working, and you see at the top it'll show me what tab I'm working in. You can close all the other views of the project. If you close this view as well, it'll close the project as well, so just be careful. So I'm going to be working between site and site working. Very important. Okay, now that I've got site working, you'll notice in the middle of a view you're going to have a base point and you're going to have a survey point. So one will be a survey point and the other will be a project base point. We'll tackle this later on, but a survey point has a certain role, and your project base point also has a very specific role. This will all depend on shared coordinates, but again that's a very complex topic which we'll cover in 3rd year. So for now we just must make sure that we're working around the origin of the drawing. And in essence, one last setting, if we go to VG and we go to site, so visibility graphics, model categories, and you go to site, just make sure, I'll switch on internal origin just so you see this for now, but just understand this is the internal origin of our project and we're trying to work as close as possible to the internal origin as possible. Okay, the survey point is the point that we will then give to our surveyor or share with our surveyor, but they'll need to provide coordinates, and you can see latitude and longitude. So all of this information we can get from a civil file. This is tricky to understand, so for now don't stress about it too much. It's something that we can give to you guys in the future typically this comes from a civil engineer. Okay. All right, so for now, we've got some elevation markers which we'll switch off. So that's the first thing I'll do. I'll leave them on in the working view so you know that they're there, but in the site view, I'm going to go to VG because we don't want to see these on our sheet, annotation, and we're going to go to elevation markers. So let's just get our views ready for what we're about to do. Press apply, press OK. Okay, so this view has no elevation markers. It has an origin. That's very important. Your X and Y, very important. Okay, and then we've got our site. Okay, good. So for now, this is all I want to see. Good. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is now that we're going to start bringing in information that we've received from the surveyor. Okay, so you'll see in that project file you've got the site civil DXF or DWG. For now, I recommend that we use the DXF files, but you can use the DWG file. I've given you that as well in case. But we want to work with site civil because typically this is the type of information that you're going to be exporting from QGIS to create these types of drawings. So this can all be created, these civil drawings can be created from QGIS. Okay, very straightforward. Okay, so now that I've got my view set up, it doesn't matter what view we're going to work in, just remember we're looking at the same level, they're all looking at level 0. It's just this, by duplicating views, we can represent each view differently, and they're all going to serve a very different purpose. Okay, in ArchiCAD you create a layer. You manage this by layer sets. It's very different to how you would work in Revit, for example. Okay, but just remember, we're looking at the same information. I've just duplicated the view so that I can look at the information in a different fashion. Okay, so with my site view active, I'm going to go to Insert. I'm going to go to Link CAD. So you want to link this information. You don't want to import this information. If you import this and you explode the drawing, it's going to embed all that information from the civil DXF file into your project file, and it might pollute your drawing environment. Okay, so just be very careful importing drawings from a surveyor and then exploding them in a Revit file. It does come with a lot of issues, okay, because it brings in all that information from the civil file. Yeah, can get very messy. Okay, so basically I'm looking for that DXF file, so I need to go to Link CAD, DXF. Very important, you can preserve the colors, that's fine. All we need to do is make sure that we tell Revit that this is, okay, so what I wanted to do, I want to orientate to view. I'm going to untick all of that now. I'm going to say leave everything as is. I'm going to say origin to internal origin, level 0, that's correct, and site civil. So I'm going to open this file. So site civil, and now I'm going to link this file in. Okay. Just to test, you can test a boundary line. So I can use modify dimensions, measure. I'm going to measure a line just to make sure that this is coming correctly. Okay. So that should give me 37,381, 37,381. So that's telling me that it's correct. Okay, if I go to site working, it should look something similar to this. Okay, just remember it will come into all your views. And in addition, if we go to 3D view, you'll notice now that this information has come in and we've got 3D contours in our project. And this is what I was explaining earlier about levels in your project. If you have to start managing hundreds of levels, if it's a large complex topography, you want to separate that from your building, just because it's a lot easier to manage your building on its own, and you probably find there's different teams of people working on the building as there are to the people working on the site. Okay. All right, and a lot of the site work gets done by the civil engineer, or for example, so we try and do a lot of our information 2D and give it back to the civil guys, and then they build it in civil 3D, for example. Okay, but a lot of this we can do ourselves because we need to build the topography so we can make a better decision on how our building is going to integrate with the site, for example. Okay, so this is the very beginnings of how you create a site drawing. And you'll see the surveyor will give you a lot of useful information. Their drawings typically come with a lot of information like the existing trees, the road lines, the curb lines, existing footpaths, the site boundaries. I added the building lines. Typically they won't give you that. You'll have to get that from your zoning certificate for the earth. Okay. But typically this is kind of the information that you'll get from a surveyor, and it will come with Z values for the contours, for example. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to create a topography, a toposolid, so we can start building the topography. So this will be a 3D object. Okay, so if we go to massing and site, now go to topography or toposolid, you need to create a toposolid. Make sure that there's no offset set. Okay, you can enable all of these settings, so it should be offset from height should be 0. If you go to edit type, make sure when you edit the structure of the toposolid, I've already set a material for you, so it's set to grass, so you can go and customize your toposolid with all different types of materials, but generally this is how we would start creating our topography right at the bat. Okay, so I've put it on it's on a finish layer because technically it's a ground layer, so it has no, we're not doing any structural calculations, none of the sort. We're literally just building the topography as we've received it from the surveyor. So you don't need to change any other settings. The only other option that we need to do is we'll need to set the primary and secondary settings for the contours, which I've done. Okay, so the primary intervals are 1000 and the secondaries are at 500 mil. Okay, great. Now that I've got everything kind of set up, the next thing I need to do is go to massing, topography. I'm going to say create from import because we've imported the sketch and I just need to select the topography that I've imported or the DXF that I've imported. Now once I've selected the drawing, you'll notice it's going to ask you what information should it use to create the topography. Now this is quite tricky sometimes to understand because the drawings that we receive from consultants, sometimes it depends how good their layers have been managed, so this can be a bit of a hit and miss exercise, but you can use the query tool and select certain layers within the drawing and you can see layer X. So maybe before you extract the information from other sources, just make sure that you know what layer the contours are on. Okay, so that's very important. When you're exporting stuff from QGIS, just make sure that you've named things correctly so you know what everything is. And remember, by default, when you link in these things, these drawings, they get pinned in a position and it's got a pin location here. So it just means that you can't accidentally move it. Okay, you can unpin it, move it, and then repin it. Just remember, use the pin tools, but just by default, you can't delete these. And you can also switch on the function where you can't select pinned objects. That's quite handy. So just understand when you're importing objects, they will be pinned. Okay, so just bear that in mind. Okay. All right, so now that I've got my file in, I've linked it, I'm going to create my toposolid. So create from import, select the CAD, select the CAD. Check none, and we know that we're going to use the contours X. Press OK. Now, Revit's going to try its best. Revit will try its best to create this topography, and you can double check in 3D. If I go to hidden view, you'll see that my major contours and the contours from the imported file should kind of coincide. You see that they do. However, there is some missing information that Revit just doesn't know what to do. Okay, so this takes a little bit of work. Now, if you're going to create topography, you can also create topography. So if you went massing inside topography, so you can just say create from sketch, you can simply create a rectangle and then you just start manipulating the points. Okay, so once you've got a sketch in, all that you need to do is then go and add points along a series of contour lines. And you can see if I select a point here, so Revit, all that Revit has done is gone and looked at that Revit file that the DXF file that I've imported and linked in, and you see it's created a series of these points along the contour lines that it could find in the project file. So straight away, Revit's tried its best to try and create a site based on the information, and it's assigned the values. Just remember, you can designate different points, but for now we're just going to use survey point or internal origin. They're exactly the same point at this moment. When things start getting very complicated and you've got large sites and we're very high above sea level, then we start incorporating survey points or project base points or internal origins. Typically, Revit is always using the internal origins to do the calculation, but you can set it to survey point. So if your survey point was somewhere else, very high above sea level, then you start using the survey point. But for now, survey point and internal origin are in the same place, so it doesn't matter which one we use. Okay, and you can see this is telling me, and that's correct based off the surveyor's information. Okay, first things first, I'm just going to fix the boundary. So I'm going to go and edit sketch, and I'm going to get rid of these diagonals for now. So I'm going to get rid of that diagonal, get rid of that diagonal, get rid of that. That's fine, it gives me a straight line, get rid of that. And I'm just going to keep one straight line on the edge here. Okay, so we could just make this a square, for example. So I'm going to create one straight line. This is the only little tricky thing to understand about Revit and the site. And it'll leave an outline of where this is. It's just kind of showing you the extent of the site. So I'm going to have a vertical line there. That horizontal line will be fine there. And I'll have another vertical line here. Okay, good. So I'm going to use the rectangle trim tool, which is the trim tool over here, and I'm going to select this bit of line work. So I'm just quickly telling, I'm just improving what I want to see in terms of the topography. So I'm going to say, well, actually those must be joined there. And if I end the command now, you will see Revit is try to remake the site based off those new boundary extents. But you can see we have some errors with the corners of the topography, so we just need to do some fine tuning. Okay, so you can do this in 3D if you want to. So for example, in 3D, I can go to hidden or shaded view maybe, and I can manipulate the contours here. Shaded, I can go and add points here if I wanted to, or in site working, I can do it in here. Okay, what's nice about Revit is it even gives us labels that we can use. Just be careful with these labels. I've just found that it's a great tool, but sometimes we don't use it that often in practice because the way it represents the markers or the notes is not how we typically do it on our plans. So we do a lot of drafting and 2D work after the fact just to make sure that it reads correctly. And you notice it's very limited on how it shows the information, the types of fonts you can use. Okay, but you can set it up. You can set it up to use meters and 2 decimal places. Okay, so it's a great tool to make sure that you don't make mistakes, but typically when we represent this information on our plans, we try and represent it a little differently, and we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, and you can see that there is a slight little error here with the site. It's quite glitchy in the corner, so we need to start fixing that very quickly. Okay, so I'm going to select the topography or the toposolid. I'm going to go to edit points. Okay, so what we need to do is you'll see that this corner here we've just got to make a rough guess, because I know that this level was 4.5 meters, for example, so maybe that needs to be 4,200. Okay, so that might fix that little issue. This one, I know that we're between maybe that one and that one, so we'll need to make a call. This is where I start using this site working, this view a lot, because I've got the DWG file below. So let me select the topography, edit the boundary. So this corner, yeah, maybe 1.8 meters high. So I quickly try and fix these corners just so that the contour lines start, and you can see the existing lines from the surveyor drawing and where our lines are. You can see Revit's created major lines which are thicker and minor lines that are thinner. Okay, so we'll get to that in a minute. Here we just need to tweak some more information. So let's start with the 0.5 and start getting this information correct. So I'm going to add a new point, and I'm going to make this 500 and make sure it's absolute and not long. So you can add points to surface that will be relative to the surface, for example. Add absolute. So if you wanted to add contours manually, you can add points or split lines. Typically it's a point that you're going to add point, and you make sure that you know the elevation of that point. Make it absolute relative to survey point, to project point. Then you can just start snapping on lines. So if I snap, you have to snap on the boundary, and then you've got to move the boundary. I've noticed sometimes this is the older version of Revit was pretty good in this respect, that it was very easy to manipulate your contours. This is a new tool that they've introduced, and in my opinion it's still a little buggy. So I'm just going to move this where it snaps roughly over there. Okay, so that's my 0.5 contour, and I can still see there's a little bug over here. So select the topography, add point, 500. So I'm going to add that along this line as accurately as I can. Okay, make sure 500. You can see sometimes if there's an error, edit, so let's just make sure, 500. Okay, it must be 500, very important. So I'm going to go and say add point, remember, absolute. So I'm going to see that one's correct, my meter one's correct there, it's not, so I need to add a meter one over here, 1000. And try and snap this point as close as possible. It's a little quirk that I've realized that's in Revit, okay, in this new version. I need to make this 1500 now, and that point I'm just going to put somewhere on this line over here. It has to be on this boundary, good, and I'm just going to go to this side and make sure that I fix this one as well. So remember 1500, so anywhere that's fine for now. Okay, then I want 2 meters, 2000. Okay, so that 2000 mark's going to go over there, and make sure this 2001 over here, so that should go over here. Good, so we fixed that one, 2 meters. This point over here, so go to edit point. That point is going to be between 2 and 2.5, so I typically round it off, so it'll be 2600 or 2750. Fixed. Okay, add point 2500. Good, so you can see we're adding these. That should be, so 2250 maybe, sorted that out. So we've got our 3 meter point there, that worked well. We've got our 3.5, that worked well. So our 4 meters we need to fix, so add a point 4000. Okay, as I said, these do take a bit of work. So in ArchiCAD, you've also got to do quite a bit of work sometimes. So it just depends on how much. Revit's trying its best to do to make a guess. You've got to go and fill in the blanks from time to time. Okay, so we can see here it's kind of accurate. So that one wasn't 2500. So this one wasn't quite accurate. So here I'm just going to pull this down to here maybe. Okay, that's fixed that. The 3 meter one. Yeah, so maybe that point must end there. So 3 meters, 3000. Okay, that's fixed. 3.5. Yeah, let's just change that as well. 3500. Good. 4 meters is good, and 4.5, 4500. So we just need to add a point here, a point there, and a point there. And then Revit will try and fill in the blanks. Good. All right, so we've fixed our topography. Here's another little gremlin. Okay, so make sure, so it didn't recognize this point over here, so make sure 500. So we're going to add a point there and maybe a point there. So I have noticed with the new version of Revit, sometimes it picks them up fine, sometimes it doesn't. Okay, so if I end the command now and I go to 3D view, you would have noticed now that it's created my topography, and I've got a 3D topography over my 2D information. So in Site, you will notice now that I've got a 3D topography that's sitting over my 2D information. So if I go to wireframe, just remember 3D objects always sit over, because in theory that DWG file or DXF file that we brought in is actually a 3D 2D object. Okay, so it's got 3D values in it, but it has 3D information and 2D information, so you want it visible in 3D as well, so you can see that you're doing this correctly. In the site view, typically what we'll do now is we'll switch off, so we'll go to VG. Remember, this is going to sit in our sheet, so I switch off the site civil drawing because we've linked this in. So go to importer categories, so VG again. Importer categories, I've switched the site civil off because technically this is the information that I need to start seeing on my sheet. So if I go to my sheet now, I'm going to go and drag in the site sheet onto my somewhere, because I'm starting to set up my sheet as well. I've also given you some legends, so in your views, so remember in this views over here, go to legends, okay, click plus site legend. I would also put this on your sheet at the moment because we're going to add information to it quickly before we get too carried away. I like to put things on a sheet earlier on, so it just means when you're starting to work on this drawing and put the drawing together, you can start fine-tuning this view on your sheet. But it's good to have it on your sheet from the get-go so you don't do unnecessary work either. So this just forces you to focus on a certain workflow. With the site legend, what we typically do is we say no legend. So click the legend view and just make sure in viewport that you say no title. Okay, this typically doesn't have a scale, so it doesn't really matter. And I nudge this using the arrow keys on my keyboard and I put that in a good location. Now typically with this viewport, again, title no line, and we're going to change the name of the sheet, and you'll see now that this view has a blue, it's got a square that's filled in with the blue. That's telling me that this view's on a sheet, so I'm going to rename this very quickly. Rename. I'm going to go say existing site. Existing site. Good, and you see that the name's changed on your... Okay, that's great. We've got a working view as well now, so we've got a working view of it where we're going to do a lot of working, but you can see that this view now, that's going to be on our sheet, is starting to take shape. Okay. Typically as well, when we create objects in Revit, this is a bit complicated as well, and it's something that we'll tackle a bit later on. It is weird to understand, but typically this is an existing site. It's not a proposed site. You'll see that things will get grayed out, and if you go to manage and you go to manage phases, I have preset this for the project because this does get very complicated. You will notice that Revit will predefine things that are, okay, so typically here, I'm always going to say no overrides. I'm just going to show you how you're going to do this. But the color, you might want to gray for now. Okay, but you can remove all of these overrides for everything that's existing, and you can override an object in your view. So here I'm just going to say no overrides. Clear override, straight away, press OK. Okay, typically here even material, remove all the overrides. Any override I have at the moment is that it will be gray because this is an existing topography. If we go back to our example, you will notice, ooh, history, let me just open that quickly. History, I did have it open. So you'll notice that we show this in dashed lines, existing contours, and if you zoom in, you'll see that there'll be major and minor contours. Okay. So typically, what we try and do is we'll select the object, and in this view, we'll go VG, so we can overwrite toposolid. Now, this is a legacy thing from the old version of Revit. We had topography and toposolid. Just remember this is a toposolid. So what we'll do is we'll override this view. So we're going to override the line work to be dashed. So here we're just going to go and say pattern, and we're going to go dashed 2 mil. Press OK. Likewise with those, and press OK. Press apply. Press OK. I don't mean to, but we'll just go to help menu. Now what it'll do is it'll show you this information. The only downside to this now is that we get the outline of the site, so maybe the best thing to do is also change that to, so topography, you'll notice, oh, by the way, you can right click, select objects, and you can override element, and here for example projection lines, we can also override the pattern here. So that's another way to do it as well. But primarily, I'll try and do this within the visibility graphics for the view, not for the project. Okay. All right, so now that I've got my dashed line work, press apply, press OK. So you'll notice everything becomes dashed. That's fine for now. It's showing us the extent of our topography, and it's showing us the major and minor contours. The thicker lines are the majors, and the thinner ones are the minors. Okay. So straight away, we have... If we go back to our sheet again, you'll notice that we've got the beginnings of a site, and not only is it in 2D on our sheet, it's also in 3D. Okay, so this is telling me, and you can see it's telling me it's an existing site. When you combine an existing site and a proposed site, it will start giving you the cut and fill. I have noticed again that this has done this weird offset. That is incorrect. I don't know why it's done this. It should be level 0, and now it's lost all the contours. So I'm just going to say, yeah, I'm going to reset shape, because technically this did this just now when I had set the levels correctly, and it did this offset incorrectly. So delete the topography. Okay, so this is something very strange with the new version. So just go back to massing and site, topography, create from import. Okay, you have to do this in my... Okay, this is something that is very interesting. Site working, I just want to go back here, topography, create topography. So I'm going to say CAD, check none, and I did check that it wasn't offset, so that's something that very interesting that it does that. Site existing, press OK, and that must be set to 0. Okay, so this is a little buggy for some strange reason. Okay, so I have noticed that, so maybe let's just double check site working. Let's just make sure that this hasn't had any sort of offset. No. Okay, I have noticed that when Revit tries to create the topography, that it has a series of these issues. It's just something that I've picked up. So I just want to make sure that that's correct. So you can see that is incorrect. Okay, so let me just undo this. So it's just a bug that I have found with Revit. Okay, so I'm going to go and say edit. Okay. So technically that is not correct. It should be 0. Okay, because it's giving you false information. Technically it should be set to 0. For some strange reason, I'm wondering if it doesn't allow zeros. So to fix that, you have to go to modify points. Now use control and you select these points over here, and you just need to make sure that the right points have the right level. This did it to me. So typically, I think this is a bug of this version of Revit that we're using. So typically in the past that would not happen. So just make sure that the levels are correct. Okay. I suppose we could keep that offset at 500. Okay, I'm just going to undo that for now. Undo. I'll leave the offset as it is because it will give us the correct information. So 500. You'll see that it does adjust the contours, and if we edit the topographies, so if we modify a point and I select this information, you can see that the elevation is correct. But this, typically you shouldn't be offsetting this at all. Okay, so that is a bit of a concern with this new version. And if I go to the original, I can kind of see that this last point is technically, if I go and edit this last point, technically that should be 0. Just do that again, that should be 0. Okay, so that is a problem. So technically that is incorrect when you're creating these sites. So let's just fix this 0. Yeah, that I have noticed this with this latest version of Revit. It is not that intuitive. The previous versions, I think this is maybe just a bug in this version. In the past, we didn't have this issue. Modify. Okay, so all of these, technically, all of these have to be up by. We have to modify all of these shapes by 500. But now, typically, this will be 0. This will be 500. So Control, make sure we're selecting all our points. Okay, so make sure all these points are selected. VG, import a category. You might want to hide the information below, so Control, Control, Control. Guys, this is just something that I've picked up with this version for some strange reason. Okay, 500. So typically, yeah, 500 above. Okay, 500. This will be 1000. So hold Control down, select all these points. Okay, 1000. Okay, so typically, I think what Revit tries to do, it tries to read the lowest point and starts from there, but typically, it's not typically how we want to do this. Okay, so typically it must just take the information provided and okay, you can see the majors and minors are sorting themselves out. Okay. Okay, this is quite annoying. So just make sure, if you're having this error, make sure that you go and correct these points. Okay, so this will be our 2 meter. So hold the control down. But you noticed, very easy to fix. Okay, 2 meters, just make sure 2 meters. Now that would have been adjusted as well, so that would have been 2250. Okay, so now this will also have to become 2500. Okay, so that's very annoying. In theory, Revit should have picked up the correct information. Okay. Okay, this will be our 3 meter. This won't do it if you've got a lot of information that goes below 0. I've just got a feeling that this new version doesn't like the 0. Okay, oops, get rid of 10. Okay, 2500. That's correct. Remember, these are, so just make sure 2500. These are your 3 meter intervals. This is your, my apologies, that's your 3 meter. There was a point underneath there, just be careful, these labels are quite dangerous. So let's just switch these off for now because they're hiding information below, delete them. Okay, so now we just need to make sure, I'm just going to put this diagonal so I can keep track of them. Okay, so that's 3.5. Okay, so these should be our 3 meters, which they are. Okay. Control, 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 control. Remember, those are your 3.5, so 3500. We had created a plateau. This will be your 4 meters. You need to select all of these points, by the way. That'll be your 4 meter, 4000. Yep. Okay, and then these will be your. Okay, so that is a bit frustrating, 4500. Okay, and that'll be our 4200. Okay, so now we fixed our topography. So that point didn't quite work, so we probably missed a point there. That should have been 3000. Good, but you'll see straight away if points haven't worked out. So that'll be 1, 2. So that'll be 1, 7. Good. That's your 2 meter intervals, and you can see that's working fine now. Okay, and this last point should be our 0. Okay, so 0, 500. Okay, good. Now that does happen, so just be careful. Okay, good. So level, and it will undercut. We've given it a thickness of 300, so it should be 300 beyond that level, so it's 300 deep. Beyond this level, you can make it way thicker, and that's just it's called a Bosch height or posh height. So that you can adjust at any point. Okay, but for now we can see that there's no difference between. Okay, good. So we've addressed that area that we had earlier. It's just something I've picked up with this version of Revit. Yeah, so just be careful. Go to site working, you can double check, you can use these contour labels to make sure that everything is correct. Okay, so now we can see everything is 100% correct and all the contour lines line up. Okay, if there are little nuances or tweaks, you just do so using topography, adding points, etc. Okay, straightforward. Cool. Now that we've got these levels in place, we pretty much in the home stretch. We've got the view looking correctly. Now we just need to start adding additional information. Now some things will be linked between this site working and existing site view, so there will be links, some things won't. So the first tool that we're going to use, it's in massing and site again, will be property lines. So I'm going to create a new property line by sketch. So typically that example that we looked at with regards to an SG diagram, Revit's got a built-in tool where you go and define your site boundary, because this line is very important. So you want to define this boundary in Revit. So I'm going to use the pick line tool, and you'll see that Revit will go and find these lines. So this will be my site boundary line. Good. I'm going to pick that up just like that. Press finish. Now when you're done, you'll notice that the site boundary line, it doesn't matter what view you go to, you'll notice that you're going to see the site boundary line every single time, property line. Okay. Very important. It's just Revit's it's a tool that in every view you understand where your site boundary is, so you don't accidentally build over it, for example. Okay, so over that line, it's given to that. So if we go to the existing site, you'll notice here's our property line. Good. Now this property line, if you click on it, you'll notice it'll give you information like area. And on the site working view, we can also go and say annotation. There's a built-in labeling tool for this earth. Okay, so I'm going to go to annotate. I'm going to go and say tag category, and I'm going to tab once. There's a boundary line, so I'm going to click twice until it selects the whole boundary line, so it adds another tag, and this will be my property tag. So this will be my earth number, for example. I'm going to call this earth 1. Okay, for now just call it earth 1 and switch off the leader. Okay, so it's earth 1 and it's 1,800 square meters. Okay, so our property has an area of 1,800 square meters. Good. The next thing we need to do is define the peg locations and the building lines. Alright, so here we're going to use the site working view quite a lot, and we're going to copy information across. So we're going to be working between our site working and our site. So I'm going to go to architecture, annotate. So the annotation tab, detail line work, and this is going to be 2D line work for now. The line work is already built in, so if you go to for building line, I'm going to use the pick line tool, and I'm going to simply pick this line, this line here, there, and there. Good. If I tab once or twice, it'll find all this connecting line work. So I can now simply copy this line work, and it'll tell me here at the bottom what it's selecting. I'm going to say copy. I'm going to go to existing site. I'm going to go to paste align to current view. Okay. So I've just copied the line work that I did in my site working across. Now there's another technique we can do. Instead of creating a bit of line work, copying it across, we can start using groups. So for example, we've got some existing trees that we also need to locate. So again, in the annotation tab, I'm going to go to component now. This will be a 2D component, and we're going to go and look for a tree. Now typically you won't have this tree in your project, so what you need to do is go to the folder that I've given you, families, and you need to drag and drop these families. So I need to drag that in, and I need to drag in my site trees existing. Okay, good. You'll see it'll drop a tree in. Now I'm going to quickly go and move this tree. I'm going to snap this, so move the tree, and I'm going to put it SC snap center. If you are using snap tools, if you go to manage and you go to snaps, you can get all the shortcuts to force Revit to snap an object to a certain location. Okay, so here's our first tree, and you just drag these arrows out until it matches the tree. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, and you can see I've got it very close. That's all we need, because remember, a lot of times these trees will get demolished, so it's just a symbol for the time being. Now what I tend to do is I make this a group. So I'm going to make a group. I'm going to call this EX trees. So I know that these are existing trees. Then I'm going to go and edit group. Now I'm going to go and start placing more trees within this. So again, snap center, I'm going to quickly go, so within this group, I'm going to go and add a whole lot of other trees. So I'm just going to quickly put these in the location. So you can see very quickly, I just used this drag and drop tool. The reason why this works like this, a lot of the times we use images that we get from high-res images and we go and document where the trees are. So that hence the family is set up to work that way. But you can set up these families to work in different ways as well. And you can typically, sometimes you can just use the information from the DWG file. Okay, so that's that for now. I've got an existing tree. So if I finish this for now, finish the group, edit group, my apologies, I didn't press the finish command and save, so that was my bad. So I'm going to copy this quickly, so snap center and snap center. Let me just quickly fix this. I'm doing this quickly just for the exercise, but remember, spend a bit more time, get it accurate. Okay, so these are the existing trees on the site, so we'll get this from the surveyor as well. You get a lot of information from the surveyor. Depends on the surveyor and how much information you've requested. Okay, so if I say finish, you'll see that this gets saved to the group. Now you can move this group's origin. I usually use my project base point or a point that I know. I'll use the setting out point for now. Okay, so I've got an existing trees group. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this group and I'm going to add it onto my site. So that's my sheet, just be careful. So my existing site, I'm going to go and edit, paste, align to current view. So it just means it puts in the right location. Now you'll notice that this group's in this view as well as in my working site working. And as I go and edit the group, as I add more information to this group now, you will notice that now that this will start adding. So whatever I do to this group, it will apply to wherever this group is located. So whatever view this group has been located, it will. Okay, so I've finished my trees. I'm going to say finish. Good. Now if I go to site, you would have noticed now it's updated this group. Groups are typically found if you go to families. And the way you've set this up, just make sure that you're not filtering stuff, you're seeing everything. If you go right down past families, you'll notice you've got groups. You can just look at groups. I typically like to see all for now, but you can focus just on groups or just on views or just on legends. So remember, you've got that functionality. But typically now we've got one group which is an existing tree. And we've got an origin point that we can use every time. That's handy. Okay, so now we've got some existing trees, we've got some existing contours, I've got a site boundary line. The next thing we need to do now is just start adding like the curb lines and the roads. Straightforward. Okay, so go back to site working. Again, I can just use the pick line tool. So for architecture, this is another technique I'm going to show you, which is quite handy to know. So I'm going to go to building line, I'm going to go to 2 roads, so road markings. For now, I'm just going to make it line weight 2 because I'm just covering quite a broad. You can start making a curb line. You can add more lines if you need them, line types. So I'm going to use the pick line tool. So I'm going to say I want that line work, I want that line work. So what it's doing is it's looking at the Revit, the AutoCAD file and trying to find as much line work as it can. So this is a great tool to quickly re-represent information from an imported DXF file or Revit file. So you can see there it's created, I've copied all the roads, etc. So all I need to do now is select one bit of line work, lines detail, right click. I'm going to go and select all instances in view. So everything of that same category will be selected and simply copy, and I can simply go to site and paste align to current view. Okay, so very quickly I've got my road lines, my curb lines, my footpath, my site boundaries, building lines, etc. So from a drawing perspective, we've drawn everything we need. Now what's also interesting is we're combining 3D objects, which is topography, and 2D objects, so annotation objects. Just understand that this is a typical workflow. Annotation objects will always sit above 3D objects. So a good example of this, if we go back to 3D view and I go to wireframe view, you'll notice that the AutoCAD stuff is below. Now, if this was a 3D line work in that view, everything that was below the topography will never display. So hence we've got to use annotation lines and drafting elements to put over your view. That's very important. Okay. The last thing I'm going to add very quickly is a symbol. I want a north arrow, so make sure that you use the north arrow and locate the north arrow. Go back to your sheet very quickly. Make sure that everything fits on your sheet, center it. Okay, so most of the drawing's done. All that we have to do now is start adding some of the annotation objects, so some notes and text, for example. Okay, so this is where I like to use my Massing Insight and my label tool, my control label tool. Okay, I have found that this tool is very annoying. It gives you good information, but sometimes the way it represents the text is not how we represent it in our drawing. So we have to do a lot of drafting in this respect. Please note that I'll pause quite a bit between these different workflows. So the first thing I'm going to do very quickly is go to my legend, because I've given you some line work and symbol to start with. So I'm going to go to legend. I'm going to copy this first symbol, my site pick, Control C, and I'm going to reproduce my site. So close these, we don't need these views anymore. Just remember, close views that you're not using quite often, because it just swamps your resources on your computer. We're pretty much done with this view for now, so we don't need it. So I'm going to Control V. I'm going to paste this object in here. Now this, I can just start copying around. Now, typically this is a bit of detail line work. For the symbol, I don't need the center mark for now, because I know where the center mark is and I'll be putting it on the center mark. Okay, so I don't need that on. I've just switched it on, so it just kind of highlights where this goes in here. So I've just enabled the center mark just for the legend view, but on our site, we're not going to use it. Okay, so this is just where our site peg's located. I'm going to copy this, snap center. It's got a bit of text attached to it, so I'm just going to put these in the right location. Very quickly, put these in the right location. Okay, remember, snap end. Then I'm going to quickly go and number them correctly. Okay, so you've got a question mark, you can just start here. We'll need our example, so please follow the example I provided. You would have seen the example I've given you. So A, B, C, D. Okay, so just start numbering these in a coherent fashion. Please use my example. Okay, so that'll be A, make sure it's caps lock. Okay, move the text to the right location. This is why we don't use family sometimes, just because some families where the text or the text label is located, you can't move it. It gets very difficult to work with, and you've got to write parameters. It's just not ideal for how we represent our site plan. So sometimes we have to use 2D elements to represent certain things. Okay, so I'm going to quickly pause the video and go and rename the rest of these. Just remember, double click on the text, make this B. You can adjust the extent of the text. This is always 3.5 or 3. This is a very important label, by the way. So is the earth. Okay, so important information has a higher hierarchy. So this will be 3.5 or 3. Okay, so I'm just going to pause quickly and finish all the text. Okay, so I've quickly gone and added all of those labels. The next thing we want to do is we want to use and move the letters so it doesn't clash with different line work. Okay, so that's important. You just want to make sure that this is very legible. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add our boundary dimensions. So we're going to go to annotate, aligned. So remember, aligned, if they're not exactly aligned, you're going to press tab until it highlights a point. I just use quick dimensions very quickly so that if I am making these notes, okay, I don't make a mistake. There is a tool to do this, but for now, part of this exercise, I want you guys to do this manually. This will depend in your office on how they've set up your templates, but typically this is information that we're getting from, as I said, from a surveyor. So we just must make sure that these dimensions tie up with what was on that SG diagram, for example. Okay, so basically all we need to do now is we just need to start adding some annotation. So text note, this will be typically 2.5 aerial, century Gothic. Okay, that's typical text that we use. So this will be my site boundary. Okay, so boundary line. So typically we put some text in here. It'll be 37.38 meters boundary line. Okay, so that's very typical. So we show this in meters. Just remember, this is information that we're sharing with surveyors and civil engineers. So this has to be in meters. Okay, so it's 37. So that boundary is 37 meters and 38, and we round it off. So we show it unto 2 decimal places. We don't round it off. Okay, so we show 37.38, and then we'll create another label. So copy. This will be our 2 meter building line. So typically I'll put this on the inside. So this is our building line. So it just means if you measure, you can't build a structure past this. So a dwelling, everything that's occupied, you can't build past this building line. Okay, there's different rules for different types of outbuildings, but that's something that you will tackle in another. So this will be a 2 meter building line. Okay, just 2 meter building line. And if you are battling to spell certain things, there is a spell check that you guys can use as well. So it's a 2 meter building line. So what I do is I'll copy these, copy them. I'll put it over here, rotate this. So rotate your text the whole time. And remember, put this in a location where it's very legible. Rotate this, put this. Remember, this building line will be different. So there's a nice gap here. So this will be 37. So this will be 37.48. Okay, 37.48, just double check. That's a very important dimension, by the way. Don't make a mistake with that. You can adjust that smaller. Okay, so that's good. All right, so I'm just going to pause the video quickly and go and add the remaining information. Great, so I've added that information now. I can get rid of the dimensions. So just make sure everything is correct before you go crazy. I'll delete this for the time being as well. So that's good. Okay, a lot of the work I can finish in here now. So finish that off. Finish that off. The next thing is we just need to add some contour labels. So copy this. So again, rotate this down. I'm just going to change this to 0.5 meters, and that's all I need. Okay, so make this smaller and larger. Remember, you can rotate these. So I would go and locate these around your drawing very quickly. Copy them every time. So as you go along, copy it up vertically. So that'll be 1 meter. And typically what we're trying to do is make sure that we orientate the text to follow the contour line so that we know that these two have a relationship, that they belong together. So it just helps us read the drawing correctly. Okay, so I'm going to stop this again. Okay, so now we're in the home stretch. Just remember, keep saving your project the whole time. Please save the project as you're working along. So remember, save as, save project as. Exercise 4. That's fine. File, save as project. I'm just going to quickly save this. So in case I lose information, so I'm going to call this exercise 4, and I'm just going to put U. Okay, and your student number, just like that. Good. So the whole time, keep saving so you don't lose your work. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to use some street names. So annotation again. This is quite large. This will be 5 mil, century Gothic. These will be street names. So just add in the street names as well. So this will be Main Road. Main. I usually make these caps as well because typically this is quite important again. Again, go and add the rest of your labels. Add your footpaths. Typically that will be the same width as that. So go and add the remaining notes. Okay, so we've got our street names put in now. We've got our footpaths located. So this, at any point you can move this information. Just make sure it's in a location that's easy to read. This will be the road, this will be a footpath. We know that this is our curb line, for example. Okay, so this is all we need to add to our drawing at the moment. You've put your north point in. So now we go to our sheet. Make sure everything fits on your sheet correctly. Okay, a lot of the times in your site, existing site working, you want to switch on your crop view. So make sure that there's no information that's outside of this crop view. Just it means if the crop is active and it's cropping information, you might lose information. So just make sure that the crop of the view is set correctly, and make sure that your sheet should be working very similar to mine. The next thing I want you to do is go and populate all this information. So your student number, your surname. Okay, as per the last exercise, this should automatically change scale, okay, depending on the view that you put in. Everything else should just read the same. So put today's date. I want today's date, your student number, your last name. So just put in your last name. Doesn't, because your student number is kind of what I need. So your last name and your student number should be fine. And just change this to my site, for example. And this will be my site workshop. Just like that. Now once you've done, you can simply export this. So you're going to go to File, Export As. So you're going to go Export PDF. Now once, this is very important, make sure that you have the correct sheet size. You've got the right name if you saved your project correctly, so just save it in the right location, and remember to upload this for me as well. So I'm going to save this into my desktop where I've been working. Workshop 4, open that folder. Revit, open that folder, so I'll save it in here. Open. Okay, great. So it needs to be an A1, and this should always be zoom 100. This is very important, zoom 100. Just like that, and then we're going to go export. Great, export. You don't have to save the settings. So you export the file. Please make sure, and you should have a 3D view of your site as well. Okay, so you should have a 3D of it as well. We're going to start doing more 3D manipulation in our next workshop, where we're actually going to cut things into the topography and duplicate the topography and make it a proposed. Okay, so it does get a bit more nuanced later on, but for now, I just want you all to be able to create topography based off surveyor's information. Great. Okay, so that's that for this workshop. Your sheet should look like this. Please save your project and upload the PDF and your Revit file. Great. And your example file should look like workshop 4. I'm just going to quickly open that Revit, and this is the exercise file that I've exported now. So it should look like this and read like this. Just remember, you must delete those contours. So that was my bad. Just make sure that you delete these contours. Okay. Great. Save your project. You can leave them on, but for now, typically we show our contours like that. Remember to export, so file, export as PDF, export as PDF. Okay, so just remember, you can replace the existing file just like that. Export, it'll ask you yes, replace file. Okay, sorted. So it would have fixed our file for us. So if we go to the example now, you should see this will read correctly. Great.